if you are under pressure, you will make mistakes. And those mistakes can be very, very expensive. After all, cybersecurity or even IT is just a tool. And we need to use the tool to solve some problems. People don't realize that those attacks can happen to them as well. And how we can resolve them and then take that forward.
Welcome to The Business Game, a podcast that moves the needle. Hey guys, before we get started today, we just want to take a moment to thank one of our sponsors, TrafTrack. If your traffic control, construction, or security crews are still juggling manual check-ins, scheduling, and resource deployment, you're leaving productivity on the table. TrafTrack's app automates shift assignments and timesheets in seconds. Visit traftrack.com to see why over 1,000 industry professionals rely on it every day. And thanks again to TrafTrack for supporting The Business Game. Hello and welcome to The Business Game, a podcast that moves the needle. I'm Steve Plummer.
And I'm Kalina Steno.
Before we get started today, make sure you like and subscribe wherever you're listening. Today we're joined by cybersecurity expert Shantanu Bhattacharya of CyberCure. Hi Shantanu, how are you?
Doing good, Steve and Kalina. How about you guys?
Really good, thank you. Shantanu, to kick us off, tell us a little bit about you and your business, CyberCure.
Yeah, so I started off as a developer, a software developer. I did my graduation and post-graduation in computer science, and then followed it with starting as a defense scientist of India. There is an organization called Defense Research and Development Organization. So I used to be a computer scientist and did some software for missiles and things like that. That's how I started. And then I graduated into a company where we developed the internet software, the software which takes you to the internet. Nowadays, you don't have to install anything to get onto the internet. It comes by default. But there was a time when you had to actually physically install the NIC card, the network interface card, and then install the software on top of that before you could go into the internet. And we used to develop the TCP/IP stack at that time. So that's how I started. And now here I am with my company called CyberCure, which does cybersecurity consulting, but with a difference. Many small and medium organizations have a challenge where what they do is they spend a lot of money on to cybersecurity, hoping that if they actually buy some tools and start deploying them, it will give them the protection. But unfortunately, that's not how cybersecurity works. So you need to be very directed and intentional to get the right kind of protection. And that's where we come in. We provide measurable protection to businesses.
All right, looking forward to diving into that and the measurable protection.
Yeah, wow. So, Shantanu, what from your childhood do you think has shaped the values that have led you to the cybersecurity space and the leadership that you hold there?
Yeah, so I come from India, and my father used to be in Indian Air Force. And as such, I was always brought up in a scenario where we had to look at friends and enemies kind of thing, because in India we had some wars of our own in those days, and that made us have that mindset kind of thing. So yes, it did um, build some of that mindset for me right from childhood. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, fascinating.
It
I love that
is.
dynamic, and you've brought that into your professional life. And all right, let's dive into that a little bit more. You've spent 25 years or more in this field. So looking back, Shantanu, what are some of the standout moments, the milestones in your career that you still view as really meaningful?
Yeah. So actually, I was talking about the TCP/IP suite of products which we used to build, and when we built that, we used to sell it worldwide, and we won the TCP/IP suite. Actually, won 42 international awards in its whole lifetime. And during my tenure, we won 17 of them. So, yeah, so that was one major thing. And most of those awards came from the US actually at that time. So it was very well recognized. Then um, I had a time when I used to build what is called as the public key infrastructure suite of products. At that time, I used to be the chief architect for that. And that was used by the US President then, Bill Clinton, to sign the electronic signature bill. So make electronic signature bill a legal tender. Before that, you couldn't use electronic signature as in a legal document. So, yeah.
Wow.
And I think we can all agree that the electronic signature is very handy. Yeah. And so, um, obviously, with great success comes failures as well, and we learn from those. Do you have some big failures that you've come across that have been pivotal for you in your success?
Yeah. So let me actually talk about a failure. I've had multiple failures. So I wouldn't say that I had success all along. So one of the recent failures was I was actually working for one of the Australian federal government agencies. And like many other organizations, they were struggling to figure out how to, at an enterprise level, see how the effect or impact of the investment into cybersecurity was. And it is not very easy to do that because different pockets might do different things in cybersecurity, but how do you measure how much is the cost, total cost, and how do you measure at the enterprise level what is the protection that you've got, what is the impact? And that was a struggle that we were having. And what we did out of that was I was summoned to do a particular project where I had to solve that problem along with the lead enterprise architect of the organization. And what we did was we came up with an organization which aligned the cybersecurity risks with the enterprise risks, which would map them. And so what happened is there were already enterprise risk owners for each of the risks that was there. So what happened then is once we did an cybersecurity project and found which are the pronounced risk areas, then the enterprise risk owner of those risk areas would do the funding for that project. And that way they were able to see how much was the investment and what was the protection which was brought. So that was a big change. So from that failure, we were able to actually turn it around into something which was very useful for the organization.
Oh, awesome. That's such a cool turn of events.
But that's often where our learning is, right? In those moments where it doesn't go so well. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Shantanu, let's talk a little bit about your career and some transitional moments. So, how did you transition from building the TCP IP stacks and the low level software into almost the stratosphere of advising governments and leading large security architecture with these global projects? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. So basically, when I was fresh in the industry, I started off as a developer because I didn't have that mindset to actually, or even the skill set to understand what is required for an organization to do good cybersecurity. So when I started doing the development, then I honed my skills in development space. But as I became, for example, the chief architect for the PKI product suite and things like that, that is when I actually started learning how the business problems are more important than the technical ones.
Mm.
Because after all, cybersecurity or even IT, which is information technology, is just a tool. and we need to use the tool to solve some problems. So the business problems are supreme, and they are the ones which we are trying to address. And if we actually address them with the right tools, then uh, we have wonderful results. On the other hand, if we do over engineering or focus too much on the technical side without looking at the business aspects, then we don't get the business outcomes that we need, and the businesses fail.
Speaking about business, with CyberCure, what was one of your biggest revenue growth years, and why do you think that that happened?
Yeah. So what happens in my cybercure business is more of uh, consulting. So many of the consulting work that I do either with the government or with private organizations is through cybercure. And so one of the major projects that I did, that I spoke about in terms of the changeover and things like that, that has come through uh, consulting as well. I also on the side have a different business, which is products business, which is based on patent pending products and things like that, which go hand in hand. And that then solves the problems for business. And that is why I am able to bring about, major impacts through the contracts and things like that that I do through the business.
All right, just following on from Kalina's question there, Shantanu, let's dive into a little bit about, I guess, the operational stuff of a business, because you build and lead teams of 50 plus cybersecurity experts, and that can't be a very simple process, at least. So, what operational practices did you establish to maintain, and I guess it's both the innovation side of things, but also the discipline at scale?
Yes, it's a very important question you ask, because when you talk about discipline versus you are talking about innovation,
Yeah.
they are a little bit different from each other.
Yes.
When you have too much of a process, then you leave little room for innovation. But at the same time, when you try to do innovation, then you have to break free from the process so that you can innovate and then bring back that process. So that is a very critical thing for any business to look at. When you look at a particular business, then you need to focus on where you want to innovate versus where you want to stick to the process. So there are some bread and butter areas where you would like to innovate, because that is where your value comes from. That is where you would actually allow more innovation to happen. But there are a lot of things which you would do run of the mill, which you need to do to make the business successful. That is where you actually stick to the process. So having a right balance of innovation versus process is very critical for any business to be successful.
A quick follow up on that. So where's the line there? How do you judge where the line is in that balance? If you go too much one way or too much the other way, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so that is where the CXOs have to use their judgments as to where you actually stick to the process more versus where you can't stick to the process because you want to innovate. So what generally ends up happening is, if there is in cybersecurity, for example, there is a lot of compliance and things like that that happens. So in those areas, you can't do too much of innovation because you have to comply with the regulations or the frameworks that are available. Because of, without that, you are found to be failing and you can be penalized. So those are the areas where you can't do too much of innovation, even though there are some scopes of innovation there too, but we won't get into that at this moment. So, uh, so compliance related activities have to be process oriented, versus when, let's say, I am talking about how should I start doing a new way of protecting against different types of attacks. That has to be thoroughly innovative. So that's where, that's how you determine. So um, you need to figure out as a CXO, like for example, I'm a business owner, as to which is the right place to use innovation versus where you can't, because that will fail the business. So yeah, it's a tricky thing. That's right.
And this space that you're in is obviously very niche. And so, how do you um, sort of advise these C-level executives who might not have that technical background that you do? How do you keep them informed? And yeah, what's the process there?
Yes, that is another very important question, because uh, not everybody has to be cybersecurity expert in an organization. But they have to leverage the benefits we get from the cybersecurity.
Sure.
And as such, one of my key roles is to actually explain to them in business terms as to what is it that we are giving. So, for example, if I take your business as into perspective, then I might be telling you things like, okay, so you have, for example, um, CCTV cameras, and the CCTV cameras might get hacked. So I will put protection around that. That is easy for you to understand, that what is it that I am trying to protect against. And you can then tell me whether that is a protection that you are looking for or not. But if I went and told you, oh, well, I'm actually using the protocol number this, and with that protocol, this particular packet will come through, and that can damage your CCTV camera, or it can take control of your CCTV camera. That is too complex and too technical, and that is not required. So I need to be able to differentiate between the technical details and the actual business outcomes that those technical steps provide. And that is very, very important, because if I get into the technical details, then I'm expecting that everybody should be aware of the technical details. And that is an unrealistic expectation from my point of view, because people need the services and people don't need to understand the technical details.
Sure. But are you explaining to people too? Because I think even myself, I'm probably a bit naive in this space of how important cybersecurity is now more than ever. What's your take on that in terms of the future with cybersecurity and with the trajectory of AI, deepfakes, all of these things that are coming out? I think we really need to all be a little bit more honed in on the importance of cybersecurity. So how do you sort of address that with people and drumming in that importance?
Yeah, so one of the very interesting thing about cybersecurity is many of the, like most of the life uncertainties. So when we, let's say, go out of our home, we don't think that we might have an accident today, but we might still have one while we are driving. So I'm not wishing it on anyone, but that is how we are actually built as humans. Similarly, in cybersecurity, many organizations actually think that I will not get attacked, but my neighbors or competitors will. So that is sometimes a challenge in the cybersecurity industry, because people don't realize that those attacks can happen to them as well. So you have to balance as to how much you can educate a business versus where you expect the business is already mindful of some of the risks that they might have, and then actually go along with that. So that becomes a very critical part in when I get into an conversation. So if the organization is completely sort of thinking that they might not get attacked at all, then it might not always be helpful to go through the education process. But whereas if there is a little gap in terms of, yes, I know that there might be some attacks, but what kind of attacks might I be affected by? Then that makes sense, because then I can actually inform them of, in their context, what are the attacks which might be relevant and how we can resolve them, and then take that forward. So that's the kind of fine balance that you have to take as to where you educate versus where you stop and say, this is not the right time to proceed.
Yeah, sure. You don't want to be talking to a brick wall if people's eyes sort of glaze over there.
Hey guys, just wanted to do a quick shout out to our affiliate partner, Opus Clip. If you need great videos without hiring an editor, their AI engine turns your raw clips into share-ready content in under a minute. No skill required. Find our link in the description to support our show and get a great sign-up bonus. Create more, stress less with Opus Clip. Now back to today's episode. Shantanu, one of the things you talk about, and I love this phrase, right? It's shifting power from attackers to defenders. I just love that
I
phrase,
love
right?
that,
Let's take the
especially
power
tying
back,
back
yeah.
to your dad. That's
Yeah, absolutely. So in building your current venture, it is focused on that dynamic of shifting power from the attackers to the defenders. So what are the most risky or resource intensive decisions that you've had to make in doing that?
Yeah. So you say that, shifting the power from attackers to defenders, that is so powerful, because if you actually go and see how the attackers attack, they go on the dark web. Let's say I am completely novice as far as cybersecurity is concerned, but I know how to go to the dark web. You won't believe there are services available for $1 which you can buy, and you buy that service and you tell them that you attack this organization for me. So I don't need to know any cyber security to perform an attack. I can pay that dollar, and there is somebody else sitting there who will execute the attack.
Wow.
That is the kind of leverage that they have.
Well, I hope everyone heard that, right?
That's so
Folks, I hope you
And
scary.
heard that.
if we look at the defender scenario, what we try to do is to defend our organization alone. But we need to have a synergy where all defenders should be able to leverage from the experiences of others, so that we have similar kind of synergy in protection. That is where I say that the power needs to shift from the attacker to the defender. Because for an attacker, they have actually built an ecosystem which is so easy for them to use without having to have the expertise in cybersecurity. So we need to actually, as protectors, have solutions which are mind changing or game changing for us to be able to successful. For example, in the data protection side, what currently happens in most of the traditional vendors who provide the data protection stuff is they understand how the attackers operate. They understand and research how the attackers operate and then provide solutions to that. That is fantastic. That is very good work. But what happens if the attacker changes their modus operandi? If they change their modus operandi, then suddenly you do not have a solution for that. And that is many times the case in data protection kind of thing, which is why when we built our data protection solution, we have a patent pending way of identifying all the ways to access the data. So we monitor all paths to the data, whether it be covert path or overt path. And we monitor that and then determine whether it is a legitimate or illegitimate access. which is independent of the modus operandi of the attacker. So, which then means whatever methodology the attacker uses, we are well protected. So, that's the kind of game change that we are trying to build in. That is one example. So, that's the kind of approach that
Yeah.
I use.
And just on that, at the start of today, you mentioned about providing measurement for your clients. Is that one of the tools that is a measurement tool for you to go back to the client and say, well, look, we've found all of these things, and so they can see the benefit of the work that you're doing. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes, very much so. So just to give a little bit more deep dive on the current scenario, what generally the statistics says is an enterprise can deploy anywhere between 80 to 85 different cyber security tools to protect against cyber attacks. But even despite having so many tools, they are only able to detect 42% of the data breaches through their tools, which means the large part, 58%, still goes undetected. And when they have to detect those 42%, they take 194 days on the average to detect, which means the attacker is in your network for more than 6 months already, which means they might have done a huge amount of damage already. So, and when they try to recover from that, they take about 6 to 9 mil USD to recover from each data breach
Oh
that
my
is there.
gosh.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow.
So, with the tool that I am talking about, which actually can identify all paths to data and figure out between legitimate and illegitimate, we are able to not only detect but protect against 96% of the data breaches. So, which is a huge change. And we can do that within the first 3 days of the attacker launching the attack. So, and we can, for the remaining 4% that can get leaked, we promise that we actually reduce the cost by at least 50%. So that's the kind of change that we are trying to bring in
Wow.
to the.
Can I just ask, what is the motive for these attacks? I mean, I understand that data is valuable, but what is it that is the most common sort of reason for attacks? Is it like competitors? Or are they selling that data, especially if they're executing these attacks for $1? How does that, what's the motive? Or are they just bored and malicious? Like all of the above?
So, yeah, so people who are bored, they are generally the tech savvy people and they just want to try out things, which used to be, we used to have that term script kiddies some time back. What young people would do is they would learn the ropes and they would try to perform some attacks to see what happens, kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
So those are the people who, when they are bored, they actually try those attacks, but they don't have a specific malicious intent, maybe. But nonetheless, that can cause sometimes very major, disruptions. So even though they start out with a non-malicious intent, but that can happen. But the people who buy to do an attack, they can be competitors, for example. So, for example, I have a hotel chain, okay? And a competitor comes around and wants to soil my reputation. And so what they would do is they would actually post, bad uh, reviews about my hotels and things like that, which might not be legitimate, and all of those kind of things to soil my reputation. Other things they might do is they might deface my website and then, have completely different messages going through my website, which then can harm my reputation as well. So that is the competitor kind of thing. But now, if you look at the Russia Ukraine war, then what happens is Russia is constantly trying to find out what Ukraine is going to do tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. And they would like to protect themselves from all the stuff today, what is being used as attack mechanisms tomorrow or day after tomorrow. So that is another level of attack that happens. And that is a state level, um, you know. So there are many motivations of why attackers attack. There might be others who are financial fraudsters who, if I have a retail shop online, then they would like to take my customers' credit card numbers and run their own credit card transactions and don't have to pay for those transactions. So those kind of different motives are there for different types of attackers that are there. And there is no dearth of motivation, right? Because even if we look at our normal life, there are some people who would like to cause trouble in others' life. That is just some people attitude. And that is the same in case of cybersecurity as well. That there are some people, not all, not the majority, but some people who try to do these kind of disruptive activities.
Can we talk a little bit about the public key infrastructure? You mentioned that earlier on. What are some of the behind the scenes hurdles that most people don't know about, and how do you solve them while keeping delivery timelines realistic?
Let me actually give a little bit of the technical stuff here so that I can explain
Yeah.
the answer to the question that you have. So public key infrastructure is actually based on what is called as asymmetric encryption. So normally what happens in computer science is there is two different types of encryption. One is symmetric and one is asymmetric. And why are they called like that? Symmetric is something where you use a key to encrypt and then you need to use the same key to decrypt. So let's say, suppose I wanted to send some secret message over to you. Then I would need to send you the key so that my encrypted message is something which you can decrypt, right? Because otherwise you won't be able to decrypt it. You need the same key that I use to encrypt it. The problem with that is now I have to send the key as well. And that has to be sent in a secure way as well. So do I encrypt the key as well? And then what happens to the key which is used to encrypt the key? So that actually gets into a spiral. So they have come up with, some people have come up with this fantastic algorithm which is asymmetric. So the key which you use to encrypt and the key which you use to decrypt are different. So what then happens is I can actually give you one key and I can keep the other key. I will encrypt using one key and send the message over to you. And the key which is already there with you, you can use that to decrypt it.
Uh-huh.
So the problem of sending the key every time around is solved. That is what the PKI technology actually can do. And one of the behind the scenes with PKI technology is PKI technology technically is very powerful and can solve a lot of the cyber security problems. But what happens is that the technology is so complex that there are many moving parts to it. So because there are so many moving parts, it's easy for the company which is implementing it to implement it incorrectly. And that is where the problems actually arise. So people might make one small mistake and that in implementation, and then that can have an effect and things like that. So that becomes essential part. So I've actually done a PKI strategy for some organizations where they are uh, advised and guided as to what is the best way for their organization to implement the PKI technology so that these loopholes aren't there. And or even if they are there, then it is caught very early on before any effect is there. So then they can actually go ahead and use the technology very well.
Yeah, wow. Geez, this is a whole new world for me. So I'm learning so much from this. Thank you. With all of your experience in this space, looking at cybersecurity and the industry now, what would you say are the best parts of the culture within that space today? And what are parts that probably need some adjusting?
Yeah. So one of the major problems which organizations face, middle and small um, organizations, is that they do not have enough money to obviously fund all their cybersecurity needs. So what they should do is they should prioritize and they should have somebody who can help them do that prioritization. Because if the prioritization is not done right, then they might be able to get some protection, but that protection might not be giving them the right kind of bang for the buck, if I can use that terminology. So that is the thing. And it is not actually only the small and medium size organizations which have this problem. You might have heard recently Microsoft had an attack on their XDR product. So even large organizations, and Microsoft is now more than $1 trillion organization. So they have the problem. Small and medium organizations have the problem. So the problem is there, and people need to be mindful of it, and they need to have that prioritization as to what is it that I need to focus on. I can't focus on everything. Similar to our household budgets, we can't buy everything what we like. We need to prioritize what is it that we can buy. I'm not talking about Elon Musk, who is now $500 billion worth,
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
who can buy everything, but not everybody is like that. So, in which case, then you need to prioritize as to what you can buy today and what you need to wait for or what you need to save for, and those kind of things. Same thing goes with cybersecurity.
Can we talk a little bit now about leadership? And you have a lot of experience in leading and managing teams and so forth. So I'd just love your thoughts about some lessons you've learned. One about leadership, but leadership under pressure in particular, because the stakes are high in the industry you work within, and when a breach or a threat demands rapid response, that can be a tense time. And as the leader, you're held accountable. So what lessons have you learned about leadership under pressure?
Yeah. So, one of the things we constantly keep talking about and is very important is leadership under pressure. But what we need to be mindful of as a leader who is managing, let's say, a cyber incident, is that you are never under pressure, because if you are under pressure, you will make mistakes, and those mistakes can be very, very expensive. I'll give you a very simple example, which is very counterintuitive. Is, let's say, suppose, God forbid, but let's say, suppose there is an attack on your company, cyber attack on your company. What is the first thing that you would try to do? As a normal person, you would try to, start mending things and start correcting things. But that's not the best thing that you should do, because you need to be able to identify who the attacker is, and you need to prove that in the court. So there are several steps before you can collect all the evidences. And unless you have collected all the evidences, before you make some changes or the corrective steps, then that is the wrong thing. So you should first collect all the evidence. So you should get the forensic expert, cyber forensics guy to do all the evidence collection before you start taking corrective measures. Because otherwise, you will never be able to prove in a court of law what happened and who the attacker was. So if, let's say, if there is an attack and there is a damage, and if I came under pressure and I started doing corrective actions because I thought that I should have done that much earlier, and I start now doing that before collecting the evidence, then that is the wrong thing. So that is the most important thing. So if we take the example of the Optus CEO right now
Mhm.
in Australia, he is being put under a lot of pressure, even to the extent that he should quit. And, he is not a good leader and all of that. So there will be situations when things go wrong, and it is not extraordinary for things to go wrong. Yes, we should not make the same mistakes repeatedly, but then mistakes do happen. And then at that time, you need to have that poise, you need to have that, uh, you know, the coolness about you to be able to deal with it systematically. Because the moment you lost your cool, the game is lost. So that is the most important thing. And we should learn from the Optus CEO. I think I would appreciate a lot about the way he is handling the questions and the way he is still approaching the media. The media is actually killing him every day, but he still comes back to the media and reports and keeps his cool.
So it's more process than pressure, I guess, is what you're saying there. And you've got to have that
Yeah.
process in
So,
place.
yes, absolutely. And it is the attitude that we need to hold. We can't be pressured. Yes, there will be pressure, but we need to be able to sustain that pressure and still operate with systematic process and all of that in place.
Yeah.
Can I just ask quickly, what do you have any personal sort of rituals that allow you to keep that cool and poised when you're in those high pressure moments? What do you do personally to stay focused and not let the pressure crumble you?
It's not a rocket science here. It's a very simple thing, and all of us probably know about this. Simple breathing exercises actually keeps our, what happens basically is when you are under pressure, then your heartbeat goes up and those kind of heart rate goes up and things like that. So what you can do is simple breathing exercises, having deep breaths, and that will slow the heart rate down, and it will slow your mind down as well, and you are much easier able to handle those situations. So it's a very easy thing, but many times when we get into the pressure, we forget to do that, and that's the challenge.
Yeah. Shantanu, one of the things we like to do as we finish is to fire 4 or 5 rapid questions at our guests just to get to know the person behind the microphone. So are you ready to go? I've got 4 quick questions for you.
Absolutely.
All right.
Fire away.
All right, here we go. So the CEO or the leader who has had the most impact on you?
So I had an organization which I worked in, which was, I was talking about the PKI product suite. And in that instance, I had a individual called Aniruddha Shrotri. He was uh, a person who is not only technically solid, but as a human being, he is a person of gold, I can say. So he's the person.
All right, fantastic. Who or what couldn't you live without?
I can't live without thinking about cybersecurity. It has become my lifeblood.
Love that. iPhone or Android?
I prefer iPhone, but I don't think you can compare the two in that sense, both have strengths of their own.
All right. And what was the last book you read?
Yes, the last book I read was the six the six thinking hats by Stephen Covey, I think, if I remember the name of the author right.
I have a question.
Yeah, go.
What was your first job?
First job was in Defense Research and Development Organization as a computer scientist.
That was your first job?
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm like, wow. How old were you when you took that on?
I was exactly 21 years old.
Okay. Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
It was September 1991 when I joined.
Wow. All right, fantastic. And last one, where can people find you and your company?
Yeah, I am very much active on LinkedIn. That is one thing which is a thing which I do more often because there are more technically oriented people on LinkedIn. That's probably the only social media I'm on.
Yep. All right, fantastic. On that note, thank you so much for joining us today, Shantanu. It's been an absolute pleasure. I don't know about you, Colleen. I've learned a heap about cybersecurity.
So much.
And again, folks, don't forget to like or subscribe to The Business Game wherever you're listening. That's all we've got time for. We'll see you next time. To help support our continued mission to provide free, best-in-class advice from the world's most compelling business leaders, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. See you next Saturday. Thanks for tuning into The Business Game. If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe on YouTube and follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay connected. A big thank you to our major sponsor, TraffTrack, for powering today's episode. And join us again on the next episode of The Business Game, a podcast that moves the needle.